Welcome to the Story a Day podcast. This is Julie Duffy, encouraging you to be a writer today, not someday. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon. This is Julie from Story a Day. And today I have another guest on the podcast. This is Michele Reisinger, who studied English and political science at Penn State and received an MA in English literature from the University of Delaware. She lives near Philadelphia with her family and teaches senior and AP English at a New Jersey high school. Now, her short fiction has appeared online at Light and Dark magazine, Prometheus Dreaming, 34th Parallel, and is forthcoming in The Mighty Line. And her story, Ask and Ye Shall Receive, was a Merit Award winner for Passion and featured in Tulip Tree Publishing's 2019 anthology series, Stories That Need to Be Told. You can find out more about Michele at her website, M.E. Reisinger, and I'll provide a link to that in the show notes. And Michele, as well as being a writer, is a member of the Story a Day community here. Welcome, Michele.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Thanks for coming on the podcast. So one of the reasons that I wanted to talk to you is that you jumped into the Story a Day community about a year ago, I think. And from your bio, you've got a fantastic, history with literature. And I'm going to guess that you have sort of a straightforward and a complicated road to becoming a writer with that history. So what is your history with writing?
That's a good way of putting it, straightforward yet complicated. I've always written. I don't remember a time when I didn't write. In fifth grade, my mom had given me a diary, so I started journaling. I wrote stories in my English classes, vocab and creative writing, and I would tell people that I wanted to be a writer. And my teachers and guidance counselors, as teachers and guidance counselors sometimes will do, they guided me towards a practical career where I could use my writing skills, and that was journalism. So I veered into journalism, writing for school newspapers. I wrote for the Harrisburg Patriot News as an intern when I was in high school and college. I also worked at a radio station. I had a live classical music broadcast. Knew nothing about classical music other than I loved it. And so I would, on my shift, I was alone during my shift, I would go into the library where then they had the albums with the album covers. And so I would decide what I wanted to play and talk about, and I would write these elaborate scripts based on what was on the album jacket. So I did that. And then when I got to college, however, and realized how difficult it is to be a reporter and have somewhat of a stable life, I switched it up to being an English major, English teacher. But I still wrote. I wrote stories, I wrote journals, but never really did it full time. It was more of a hobby. It was more of a free time thing when my kids would be sleeping or, over at a friend's house or whatnot. And I had this idea in my head that if you were going to be a writer, a real writer of stories, it should come easily. And I got that misguided idea from a biography I had read of, Michelangelo. And in there, he described, or the biographer described Michelangelo's process with a boulder of marble that he could see the finished form. And so he perceived it as just releasing it from its form. And I couldn't do that. So I figured I was just going to write my little scribbles and that would be it. And, I did that for a number of years. So that's where I'm coming from right now. And then I met Story a Day.
It's so, I think that's probably such a common story in the sense that you get this piece of advice that just derails you completely, whether it should be easy or whether it's you should be writing 2,000 words a day or whether it's you must publish within 45 minutes of writing your first ever story or whatever the advice is. It can be so easy for us to get ideas in our head that are unhelpful.
Yes. Yes.
So you had been writing for a number of years, and then when you found Story a Day, you started to write. And had you been published before? I'm going to say you probably had.
No,
Oh,
no, I had not, as a matter of fact. So I had gotten to the point where I wanted to start taking my writing more seriously, and my kids were getting older. I had a little bit more time. And so I started taking different kinds of online courses through Gotham and Writer's Digest. And through there, I had heard about Story a Day. So I was writing and submitting, but the closest I got to publication was one of my stories won a contest. Well, it was second place in a contest for emerging writers. But no, before Story a Day, there were no publications, no.
oh, that's amazing. Especially because we don't really talk about publications so much at Story a Day, but I think once people get in and they start writing, like what was it do you think took you from um, just starting to take it seriously to actually getting to that point where you were getting publications?
I think for me, I mean, I do have a background in literature. I have a master's in literature. I teach English literature. So, in different ways, I've been not necessarily writing literature, but writing about literature. So, I feel like I had at least some kind of foundational background in storytelling, at least from a technical standpoint. And so, self-directed learning. I was reading a lot. I was looking at online resources a lot. Because for me personally, the issue is structure and getting from the beginning through that muddled middle.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And so, I mean, I had a lot of those pieces, but what I think I was really missing at that point was I was missing the daily writing habit, which is a big part of what Story a Day does. I needed that, sense of community and accountability
Mm.
that I did get in some of my classes, but there was never a continuity to it. Once the class was over, it was over. And so I think a combination of all of those things came together and allowed me to have the some successes that I've had. So I'm
Well, it's
happy
so
with that.
exciting because I've been able to see some of your writing, and it's not a surprise to me that having decided to start putting in that daily work that you've been able to place these things because clearly you have a talent for this and you've been all that study has paid off. So what's your process once you decide that a story is ready? What's been your process for finding homes for your stories?
Um, I use a variety of sources. I look to poets and writers. I look to Submittable. I subscribe, to email lists. I just started recently with Duotrope, and so I tend to wait until I feel that I have a piece that is I feel comfortable in sending out there, and then I just spend time researching and looking for places that might be suitable. And with the first round, I usually try to send one piece to about five or so places. And I call them my reach publications, the one that, everybody kind of like, oh, if I get published in this, particular place, notch on my belt and, yay me kind of thing. I haven't yet been published in any of those, but it is something to strive for. And frequently you get very nice feedback, which
Yeah.
helps in the revising process. So after that, when I do receive the inevitable rejections, then I go back and I continue to look. And I do have a spreadsheet where I keep track of markets that I've found that I feel might be, good for the kind of writing that I do. And I also keep track of the places that I have submitted to. So I'm not, losing track of who said yes or who said no and whatnot. And I found that pretty helpful. So, and trying to keep, right now I have two two floating around in the universe, and they're in that second tier of, waiting for some feedback or a decision.
Right. So do you try and keep multiple pieces out there in the world?
Yes, yes, ideally, yes.
From what I've seen, that is definitely definitely the way to do it. Most of the people I know who are multiply published have that going on. They've just got multiple pieces out, trying to find their home.
Yes. Yeah.
So have you noticed? Well, first of all, how do you know when a story is done? That's a question I hear a lot from people, and I think it's something that holds people back from taking that next step. And how do you know when a story is done?
That is a tough one. I don't know that I do 100% because even the ones that have been published, I look at and I think, oh, I really want to change that one word or that one phrase or maybe this should have happened. I think for me more so is if it gets to that point and I've had people review it and give me feedback and I've looked at it as well. If there's nothing major, if the changes that I feel like I still need to make are more, the fripperies and the fluff and, a word choice here or maybe an extra sentence there, um, that's like getting dressed for a party and, you're throwing on different things and accessories and whatnot. You're never going to be fully happy with it, but you have to get out the door.
Yes.
So that's kind of my approach to things. Unless, of course, when I get the feedback back from one of the places I've submitted and they point out something that I hadn't considered, then I would go back and revise that. But generally speaking, that's how I decide if I'm ready to send it out.
Have you ever had feedback from somebody that you just completely disagreed with?
I don't know that I would say I disagreed with, but I have received feedback that was not quite nice.
Mm.
People who don't necessarily get it or who don't, maybe get it isn't the right phrase, but don't necessarily read the kinds of things that I'm interested in writing. And so because it doesn't appeal to them as a reader, they tend to be harsher in their criticism. And I get that people don't necessarily like all of the same things, but it's not helpful for the negative. You
Yeah.
get very defensive when it's just negative. So I mean, minor little things, perhaps word phrases and whatnot. But what I found, generally speaking, particularly through Critique Week, which I've participated in twice so far, is that the reviewers are very helpful, and they may say things that um, I might not necessarily agree with, but there is a reason for it. And, if they're confused by something, I need to at least consider the validity of that confusion moving forward. So I, you know,
Yeah.
it, I, a mixed bag, I guess,
And look, you survived, right? You
for the
lived to
most
tell
part.
the tale.
For the most part, for the
It
most
is
part.
quite terrifying, sending your work out or sharing it with people. It can be quite nerve-wracking, but
Yeah.
I've always found, like you, that when you get feedback from people, even if it's not what you would have hoped for, it usually flags something that either you knew deep down wasn't quite working, and then
Yeah.
you can take another look at it, or it gives you a new perspective on something, and you're like, okay, so I need to figure this out. And it's still your story. It's not like anyone's rewriting it for you.
I agree. I like when I ask somebody to read something. I mean, sometimes I may ask for specific kinds of feedback, but I actually prefer not asking questions, just presenting the piece and please just tell me what what troubles you, what might have confused you, what kinds of open-ended questions you still have that you really feel needed to be answered structurally. I don't like to guide the initial readers because then I think they're trying to maybe make me happy or say something they think I want to hear when
Right.
really I want an honest evaluation.
Yeah, one of my favorite styles of critique from people is when they just kind of write in the margins what they're thinking or feeling, or what's going through their head as they're reading something. And it might be wow, or oh, this is a bit slow, or things like
Mm,
that can be quite
yes,
helpful.
yes,
So now
yes.
that you are writing more regularly, what does that look like? How do you start? What does a successful writing day look like for you?
It depends on what day of the week we're talking about. I don't have a designated quiet, I can close my door writing area in my house. Every room is filled. So I tend to take whatever space is available when people are at work or sleeping. And so if it's in the morning before work, I do try to get up earlier than I need to before work. I will be in my living room in my pajamas with coffee and my laptop. And I will usually be working in the morning on maybe a current draft, or working on recording ideas that I've had. I do try the night before to decide what I'm going to do the next day, so that I don't wake up in the morning or start my day wondering, or feeling unsuccessful because I don't know what I'm working on. Now, if I'm later on in the day, if nobody's home, I'll be in other places. I like to listen to classical music. That's a big thing for me, to set the stage. And pretty much to be successful, I feel that whatever I have decided the day before that's going to look like, I want to accomplish that. And that could be a specific scene, that could be plotting something, that could be, all right, you're going to take 2 hours or an hour and write on whatever it is that you're writing. And I keep track. I have a planner, a calendar, that I keep track of all of that, so that I can see visually, hey, this is what you've accomplished, and step by step then you get to that finished piece.
I think that's brilliant. I think keeping track of what you're actually achieving as you go along is really helpful, because when you start looking back at it and you see that, oh no, I did write X amount of words this month, or I did write on X amount of days this month, and it can feel like you're not making any progress, but then you've got that paper trail
Yes,
of success
yes,
in doing this writing life.
yes, yes. It helps me to do that. And again, because I don't really have a place that I can close the door and sit and whatnot. That is very portable. So, I can see that's exactly what I need to do. And if I don't have my laptop, I have my phone. I'm not fond of writing on my phone, but I have done that. I've done that in traffic when I'm stopped. I have to go across a drawbridge, which opens inconveniently on my way to work. So I've, done a little bit of that as well as I'm stopped in traffic, and just whenever and wherever.
And I think that's when the planning ahead comes in really helpful, because if you just sit down and you're like, okay, well, I've got 15 minutes to write, you're going to spend that whole 15 minutes trying to figure out what you're going to write. Whereas if you have
Yes.
a plan,
Yes, yes. And for me too, that also has to do with the best time of day for me. And so I've always been more of a morning person, and mornings are my most creative time. So mornings and into the afternoon, if I have a day off or it's the weekend. But in the evenings, I'm not a creative person. I can revise, I can do other writing related things and whatnot, but I cannot draft anything worth anything in the evening. So that's another part of the planning, just knowing, hey, this is my best time, and
yeah.
this is when I need to do it.
Yeah, and letting yourself have those moments. Like I have a deadly afternoon slump. So like talking to you in the afternoon is great because that'll wake me up, but trying to draft anything in the afternoons is a slog.
Yeah.
So whereas I'll come back to life later in the evening again. So
Yes. I wish I could do that.
well, you get up a lot earlier, I think. So
Yeah.
so now that you are now that you are writing more, have you noticed any sort of common threads running through your writing, either in theme or how your voice is coming out? Like, how would you describe your writing voice?
Um, in what I've been doing, I do strive to make the voice somewhat different, that is more attached to the character. Um, so which is also shaped in part by which point of view I'm using. And frequently when I have an idea for a story, I have the character in mind, I have a rough setting in mind. I usually know my beginning and my ending, although the ending could change. And so that kind of guides how I sound in the story. So the ask and you shall receive story, that was a young girl and she was uneducated and she lived in the South, I envisioned. So she had a much more you know, Southern sound to her voice in the narrative. That but other stories that are more realistic, the narration might be straightforward, but the dialogue is more specific to those characters. Thematically, that's a great question. I I love Toni Morrison's Beloved.
Mm.
And in AP, I teach that book, which is not an easy book by any stretch.
With the kids.
Yeah, oh, she's just fantastic. But that book particularly deals with the idea of ghosts. And inevitably, the kids ask the question of, well, is the ghost real or not? And the short answer is it doesn't matter. The characters believe that the ghost is real, and therefore the ghost is real. And so I've noticed in my own writing that in different ways, all of the characters, not that it's by any stretch equivalent to Toni Morrison, but all of my characters seem to be haunted by something, whether it's a missed opportunity or a regret, or perhaps not speaking up or standing up for something. And in different ways, they need to face that and deal with it, move forward. Some of them move forward, some of them do not. Um, and, you know, that seems to be a common thread thematically throughout what I've done so far. And actually, two pieces that I'm working on right now as I think of it. So I don't know, maybe I need to switch that up.
I don't know. Yeah, I hesitate to ask the question actually in case I make you too aware of what you're doing and
Yeah.
end up stalling you. But thank
Yeah.
you for sharing. Did you know what you wanted to write about before you started writing more often, or is this just sort of what you're seeing in retrospect?
I think it's more in retrospect. Um, you know, as I said, I tend to, when I have a story idea, it tends to be um, inspired by things that I see or overhear. And so, you know, if I'm in a certain place and it's a historic building, or, you know, I overhear a snippet of conversation, um, so that's where the ideas come from, and the rest just kind of comes organically from that, I guess. And it was not something necessarily that I decided to do. It was, I think, more so in retrospect. They seem to kind of fit together like that.
Yeah, well, as I say, I've had a chance to read some of your writing, and it is beautiful. So thank you,
Thank you.
and please do keep writing.
Thank you.
So thank you so much for being here, Michele. It's been very inspiring to hear about your process and your successes, and you know, from the daily squeezing in writing at the drawbridge to actually landing stories in publication. So thanks so much for being here and inspiring us.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening. Why not come over to the blog at storyaday.org and check out this week's writing prompts and articles. And in the meantime, have a great creative week, and of course, keep writing.